Social needs to be more open. Like, I just think the way that we have things set up right now with the centralized social networks is unsustainable. There's a lot of negative externalities for society, and users don't have much ability to change things. The only avenues to get change are to lobby the company or to lobby the government to regulate the company. And so that's where we are. We have a bunch of government regulations and a bunch of campaigns against these companies, but we don't have users directly building solutions because you can't. Yeah, if you look at the real world, there isn't one set of rules that applies to everyone in the world. That would cause a lot of conflict, right? If you took one city's specific set of laws and applied it to the whole world. That's essentially what we have on social media, though. And being able to create smaller jurisdictions where you have different rules that apply in different states, or like different rules that apply in different towns, that's really necessary to respect all the cultural differences that people have, to actually have local context.
Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
Well, this week we have a really fabulous guest in Jay Graber, who is the CEO and co-founder of Bluesky. I know you were involved in Bluesky very early on as well, so we'll talk about that a little bit. I just wanted to say, too, that, we're really thrilled just recently and coming up to have so many amazing women voices showing up on the podcast. It's something that we've always been thinking about, and sometimes scheduling doesn't happen exactly how we would like. But it's so important, I think, to hear from all the different types of people that use the internet, and especially we look and see that ownership of many of these big platforms is so male dominated. And so I know that's something you're really interested in as well. So tell us a little bit about Jay and kind of what came up in your conversation.
So Jay is a hacker and an activist and someone who is a technologist. She started out as Fight for the Future as an activist with this internet rights organization. And then she said, I don't want to just advocate for it. I want to learn it. And so she taught herself to program. And she is the first founder and CEO of a large social media platform app, a company that is a woman. And that, is not why she did it. But it is really important to think about the way in which Bluesky makes different design decisions, takes different company decisions from her own experience. Rose is their COO, and it's the first social media company that is founded and led by women. And it filters through what they're doing. And what Jay is doing is she's trying to build a company that not just is an alternate Twitter, but that has a vision of a world in which more people can participate, in which power isn't held in the hands of a few people.
Exactly. And as we are now building an open video app as well, I know you've been looking a lot at what Bluesky has gone through in terms of growth curves and how they've set things up from a technology perspective. So I think you touch on some of that in the conversation too.
Absolutely. Divine is an open source app. It's built on an open source protocol. It's built on Nostr, which is slightly different than the app protocol Bluesky uses. But so much of what we're doing in terms of this open source company, this open source network, algorithmic choice, user control of their identity, an open network, collaborative moderation where you can choose your moderators. So much of that stuff is inspired by what Bluesky has done, that it's fascinating to be a couple years behind what Jay is doing with Bluesky, going down that same path. And we talk a bit about that in the interview.
Yes, and it really brings us back to the roots of this podcast, which was the social media Bill of Rights that we had devised earlier in the year. So let's take a listen.
I'm very excited to have Jay Graber, the founder and CEO of Bluesky, on Revolution.Social. She is someone who has been around this space, working as a digital rights activist, as a developer, as a protocol designer, and now a founder for a really long time. So Jay, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We first met, I think, at a DWeb camp, maybe in 2018, quite a long time ago. And I remember you showing up and you talking about your work on experiments with Scuttlebutt, and you're talking about the work on trying to build things. And I actually, at one point, even tried to convince you to found a company with me. And you were talking about the need to build something open, something decentralized, something that users control. And I think the project you were building on at the time was called Happen, which was a decentralized open alternative to Facebook events, which we still need in the world. I wonder if you could tell a little bit of your story from that through the process of getting involved with the creation of Blue Sky.
Sure. Yeah, that was called Happening. It was an event app, and I never actually got it all the way to what I wanted it to be, which was this decentralized alternative to Facebook. I was starting with events because it was easier to build a community around, and then COVID happened. So I never actually got that far with it because during COVID, I sort of decided, well, there's this other new project, Blue Sky, that I just heard about that I'd actually really love to be involved with. So I messaged the Blue Sky Twitter account, like a lot of people, and actually ended up meeting Parag at the Internet Archive, which is the organization that hosted DWebCamp, has done a lot of organizing in that space. They were hosting another decentralized web talk series, and I gave an overview of all the protocols that were out there at the start of that. So then I got in touch with Parag, and then he kind of brought me into this chat room that was a lot of early Blue Sky folks involved in sort of giving shape to the project. And I don't think Twitter was super clear what they wanted to do with it at the time. Jack had just said, we're going to fund this open protocol that Twitter will be built on. And a group of us, about a dozen, got together, started talking. COVID happened. That kind of threw everything into chaos. But then in that period, I was deciding that Happening wasn't something I was going to keep pursuing. And so I started just writing an ecosystem overview of everything out there. And then I asked Twitter, hey, I will publish this under the Blue Sky username if you pay me as a contractor to do some of it. And so they basically just gave me a stipend to write this deep research project on everything. So that was sort of the research foundation of Blue Sky.
You did a lot of work in Blue Sky to make what is a very different technological background, technology implementation, feel very familiar. I wonder if you could talk about that, how you designed it that way.
Yeah, I mean, actually, a lot of the inspiration and frustrations came from working in cryptocurrency and seeing how unusable public-private key cryptography is for most people, and how everyone kind of defaulted back to centralized exchanges. And having your own wallet is great in theory, but even me as a fairly technical developer, I was doing, DevOps for a cryptocurrency network at one point. I lost keys and I lost a lot of money with like keys that I lost, And so I really learned the lesson of like, okay, this is just like not extremely usable. You really want something that actually has a spectrum of user convenience to user autonomy. And so that's a lot of the design philosophy, which is give people the fundamentals of user autonomy so that in a crisis event, or if they're really paranoid, if they just really want control, they can always migrate and hold on to their keys themselves, but give most people user convenience, because even very technical people often just want the easy solution where if they lose their password, they're not going to lose their whole account, And so that's sort of the centralized version, but the centralized version is hosting essentially all these decentralized keys that you can give users full custody of. And so that's philosophically how we do it. Just like you can, migrate your crypto off an exchange onto your own home device if you really trust yourself, you can take your own social identity off of our PDS and move it onto your own, and ultimately have control of your whole social identity if you want to custody it yourself.
And so you actually implemented a name system. So we've had this idea when the early Web 2.0 stuff came along, we had this sort of internet identity system. We had, this open ID system that came along with OAuth, and people control their names, but it never took off. And Blue Sky is the first name system, the technical term did PLC, that actually seems to have gotten many millions of users and people using it every day. And initially you created it internally within the organization, but you've now, I believe, handed it off to an independent nonprofit or a foundation?
Yeah, we're in the process of spinning off the institution that custodies it, because what we did was we looked at a lot of identity protocols as well. But when you start building an identity ledger, you go down this rabbit hole of identity rather than focusing on the user-facing features of a social network. So we wanted to just do something light and easy so that we could focus on user-facing features. So that was PLC, Public Ledgers of Credentials, which you might know was sort of backronymed from placeholder protocol.
Yeah.
And so it started off as a placeholder, but then became something more and more load-bearing as more people started using it. And so the way to make that more resilient is to spin it off into an independent institution, which can then maybe eventually migrate it to a more resilient technical foundation. And it can grow and change over the years. But the goal is to make an identity system for the social web that doesn't rely on us, and that all the other apps building on the app protocol can tap into.
That's so important, because for non-technical users, that means that the equivalent of your Instagram name or your Twitter name or your username on LinkedIn or Facebook, those aren't things on those platforms that you own. They aren't things that you can control. And in the Bluesky ecosystem, they are things that you can control. You get a say in it, which is part of that power to exit and part of what gives us the ability to resist Cory Doctorow's enshittification that can go bad on platforms.
Yeah, the goal is to have an identity, and that's part of the reason we called it the at protocol, which is someday you can say, where are you at online? And you can just tell them your handle, which could also be your domain because it can be linked to your domain name handle. And so it could be something like, I'm at, j.com. And that would be my handle across all my socials, as well as, where you could find my website and just find me on the web.
In this work, you now have a system that works. You've grown. I've talked to some of the people at Bluesky who described going from 3,000 daily active users around the election to 1 million daily active users. I wonder if you could talk about what it's like to enter these sort of waves of hyper growth and what you're considering, because Bluesky is very mission driven. It's rooted in the values that created it and the idea of long-term sustainability. What is it like, and what are you thinking as you push forward?
Going through a huge growth spurt is an all hands on deck sort of situation. So many nights and weekends and intense work periods. We've had a very small team throughout this. Like a lot of the early growth periods were 6 or 8 people, and then when we grew to millions of users, we suddenly exploded to 25 million, and we had 20 people on the team, more than 1 million users per employee. Now we're at 30 and we have over 40 million users. So that's still an imbalance there. And it just means that everyone on the team wears a lot of hats. We try to do things really efficiently. There's a sort of philosophy of do it well, but sort of as easily as possible. And so that, for example, informed how we built the identity system. We didn't go down a rabbit hole of building out something very technically complicated, because then we would need way more than one person on the team to maintain it. And so we have kind of applied that philosophy across the stack as much as we can.
One of the things that you've had to build out is a massive trust and safety team, like massive as in massive operation, not a massive number of people, that has had to operate in different legal jurisdictions, different countries. And you've done that as an entity where you're getting governments like the government of Turkey giving orders about content as if you were a centralized system. What is it like interacting with governments, their demands on this open protocol?
I mean, honestly, it's very hard right now. We're at this awkward size of starting to being we're being treated like all the large social platforms in the eyes of regulators, but team-wise, we're still 30 people. And resource-wise, we're so much smaller by an order of magnitude from all these other companies. And so it's a real growing pain period. One of the examples is all this age assurance legislation coming down the pipe from individual states, different countries, different jurisdictions. There's a whole patchwork of legislation, and they're kind of designing it with the expectation that everyone can design their own custom legislation, and then these massive nation-state sized corporations are just going to throw 10,000 people at it and comply. And we have a tiny team of 5 product devs trying to comply. And that means in some cases we just can't. Like in Mississippi, we're like, okay, this is too complex to implement. We can't serve Mississippi while this regulatory morass gets sorted out.
I live in New Zealand, and I was on the radio for RNZ, talking about this very thing, because there's a proposal in New Zealand to do it as well. And the New Zealand one says it's a social media law, but they actually ban anything that, you can post stuff and 2 or more people can talk to each other or interact. And I'm like, well, that means you have to do age ID verification for WhatsApp and Signal. And there's nothing in that law that talks about open source, that talks about community, talks about education, talks about protocols. They just have the assumption that they're regulating Meta, and the rest of us have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think it's a real problem when regulators regulate social, assuming every company is Meta, because it sort of forces the internet into becoming Meta. Like if you just regulate everything like it's Meta, then you only have designed for one player in the ecosystem, basically.
Even though they're attempting to counter the monopoly or monopolistic style power that Meta and TikTok have over the ecosystem, these regulations that are supposed to put constraints on them or make them behave better end up becoming a moat by which only a few companies are able to operate.
Yeah, and I would say that with the world that we want to see come into being and that we're trying to bring into existence, there's not just even us as operators. There's, PDS servers that aren't just one person hosting their own, but serving a community in different jurisdictions and basically a very multifaceted landscape of social rather than just a few big companies. And in that world, the regulatory burden on, say, a volunteer running their own service is just going to be very high. Like I think you've already seen some of the complexities around this hitting services like Mastodon, where you have one volunteer operator running a service for a bunch of people. How do they comply with all these things? Like they aren't even a company. At least we're a larger sized company relative to like a single volunteer, although we're not meta scale. And so I think that, what I worry might happen is you will see this a thinning out of the social ecosystem and all the spaces people have on the web because forums, blogs, places where people chat, interact, smaller forum style communities and smaller federated or decentralized social networks just don't have a space in this kind of landscape.
One thing that people may not know that you have done with Blue Sky or the app protocol, or it's called the atmosphere for the larger community, is there are many other projects that you didn't initiate, that you didn't fund, that you don't control, which interact with it. I had Rudy on here to talk about Black Sky, but there's also Gander and North Sky, and there's folks doing stuff in Europe. I wonder if you could talk about building an ecosystem beyond the company and of services that are like the social feed, like the microblogging thing, but also beyond that, because there are many other kinds of apps that now exist on the app protocol.
Yeah, totally. The community came up with the term atmosphere to talk about this broader constellation of things on the app protocol. I really like that because it's, the atmosphere beyond the blue sky. And there's a lot going on. There's photo apps, video apps, different kinds of feed builders, different kinds of apps entirely that experiment with different social forms. Like Anasoda is very interesting in that, it kind of has a self-regulating mechanism to limit how much you use social. And there's a sort of like moth theme and like collecting dynamic. So you have all these different kinds of apps spinning up that are playing around with new forms of building social. And because everything's open source and fairly well documented, although we're still improving it, I've seen people vibe code social apps. Like Dustin Moskovitz vibe coded a social app just to have his own interface. And so I potentially envision a future where you might be able to just have a custom interface that's actually customized entirely to you. And if you don't like the app because everything's open source, you can just remix it and, customize the skin or the interaction to what you wanted.
Yeah, one of the people in the Nostr ecosystem has created this thing called Shakespeare, which basically knows a lot about the protocol. It has all the prompts and everything to know about the protocol, and it gives you a lovable or replit-like interface. You can go in and you can vibe code your own social app. That would be amazing to see on the Blue Sky side and the atmosphere side, because then maybe the world of everybody using like pre-made, pre-packaged apps is the equivalent of going to the supermarket and buying prepackaged food. And sometimes you want to do that, but sometimes you want to cook your own dinner.
I think that world is getting closer than we think. Like it's something that's imminently possible where you could make a small modification fairly easily. Like let's say you don't like the color blue and you're like, I want the interface to be purple. Well, you could manage to make purple sky just for your own use if you wanted that. But if you wanted something more complex, like early on, people did some experiments where they built a skyline where it was a sort of virtual reality app that you walk into, and then there's this little character that summarizes your timeline, and it shows all your posts in 3D. It's sort of a weird interface, but it's very cool to play around with. And you could potentially, use a social app that puts you in like an AR virtual field. If you wanted something crazy like that, it would be possible to build.
The reason that is possible is because what you're building is permissionless. You don't have to go ask permission from you or Paul or any of the other people at the Blue Sky team in order to build on top of the app protocol. I wonder if you should talk about what it means to build something that's permissionless. The cryptocurrency stuff you've done before that also built on this concept of permissionless technology.
Yeah, it means any builder can come in and it's fully open APIs basically. And the protocol is the guarantee that the APIs stay open because the protocol sort of is the language that governs, what you're able to do. And the goal is you can always just come in and build whatever you want, take it any direction you want. The code is open source as well for Blue Sky. And so a lot of times users come in and they submit a pull request for a feature that they want, or they fork off the app and like do something else with it. And that's all, remixable in this world of open social.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting is I heard that you had a court order from Turkey to ban a few accounts that they were Turkish accounts, everything else. And you were able to comply with this court order as a company. And so those users are, I'm not sure exactly where you banned them, but you comply with the court order. But then you can go to Dear Social or some of these other apps that don't have companies behind them and so don't need to comply with Turkish government orders. How does that change the landscape of free speech?
Yeah, it's a bit complicated to explain the whole moderation background, but the easiest way to think about it is there's different layers of jurisdiction. So the relay, which is maybe the Cloudflare style backbone to everything, is more like the federal layer. It's where like if you make decisions there, that affects the whole network. And so spam takedowns, like very serious sort of, CSAM takedowns happen at that layer. Then there's the app view, which controls what you see in the Blue Sky app. Many other apps build off it. Takedowns there are more like state level. They affect a lot of users, everyone on the Blue Sky app, but not necessarily every single app. So Black Sky, for example, is building their whole parallel independent stack with their own relay and everything else. So they could potentially enforce different moderation decisions. And then the app layer is like a town. And so within that town, you apply all sorts of custom settings and filters, and the sort of individual moderation services and labelers you subscribe to are like your own neighborhood, and you have smaller and smaller layers of jurisdiction down to the individual user control. But in this sort of a system, you actually can have a very multifaceted moderation landscape play out where some services comply with, half of it because they're obeying all the app view rules, and then some comply with all of them because they're, beating off the relay. It's just sort of a landscape of like what layer of jurisdiction is your app sitting at that determines like how the moderation plays out in your application.
That is so fascinating because it's presenting the social media ecosystem instead of saying this is one world. I sat down with Jack at one point. We were having a debate about, this was when Trump was still on Twitter. It's like 2017, 2018. And he's like, should I ban Trump? And I was like, oh, that's an impossible question, and you'll probably be fired by the board, but absolutely you should have beforehand. And he was like, but I'm trying to build Twitter as bringing everybody together. It's all one world. We're like trying to do it. And I think that effort to push everybody into the same set of rules, the same set of norms, the same set of space is the impossible problem that led to eventually the funding of Blue Sky, because it turns out that's not how humanity works. Like, we work in these nested sort of layers of jurisdiction.
Yeah, if you look at the real world, there isn't one set of rules that applies to everyone in the world. That would cause a lot of conflict, right? If you took one city's specific set of laws and applied it to the whole world. That's essentially what we have on social media, though. And being able to create smaller jurisdictions where you have different rules that apply in different states, or like different rules that apply in different towns, that's really necessary to respect all the cultural differences that people have, to actually have local context. Because if you're trying to govern for the whole world, you're a far away, moderation team or moderation head of trust and safety deciding things, sometimes for people in a language whose you don't even speak, whose culture you don't understand, and this creates a very difficult situation. And so no matter how many local language mods you hire, you're just never going to be getting the full picture as much as somebody with a moderation team based in that country, perhaps with a local moderation filter or local moderation layer that's completely localized and specialized.
Yeah, I mean, it almost harkens back to this disability rights movement slogan, which is nothing about us without us. And that is so relevant to how we think about social media, because it needs to be with us or with every single people so that moderation could be contextual. Has it been hard to communicate that to the users, this very different way of thinking about it, to governments, to the media?
It has been. And I think part of the reason is it's philosophically very different. And then also in terms of how it plays out in the app, the Blue Sky app now is in some ways too big of an example. Like everyone's sort of sense of what Blue Sky is based around one app. And so when we make a moderation decision in the app, it seems like it applies everywhere to users of the app. And that's why we want to try to grow the ecosystem, because if you have, Dear Sky, Black Sky, all these different apps, then you'll start to see that there's a difference in your user experience in terms of what you can see, what sort of the moderation choices and defaults are from app to app. The real principle that we have tried to build at the core of everything is the right to exit. So if you don't like anything from, the look and feel of the app to the moderation choices that we're making, you have the right to take your identity, your data, your relationships, and move to a different application. And if that application doesn't exist, you have the open API, the open protocol that lets you build on it and create something that does meet your preferences. And so that means that you always have the ability to create space that works for you and your community online.
And when you exit, you don't lose the connection to everyone, because the centralized apps, they let you download your data, but you only get half of the chats and then you're gone and then no one knows where you went. They could remove your account, or just if you want to stop using it, you have no agency and choice. And so the thing that people think of the right of exit of like, oh, I can move to my own, PDS server, I can use my own domain name for my Bluesky username. What they don't realize is it then means that we're no longer dependent on your particular values. Like, you're amazing, but your political values shouldn't dictate the rules for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. Like, our goal is to make an ecosystem that's varied enough that you can start to see that diversity of different sorts of values in different jurisdictions, different sort of design choices and different apps. It's starting to emerge. And I think a healthy social ecosystem, not just in the atmosphere, but in the internet and social at large, has a lot of choice and you can freely move between them. Right now, like, yes, you technically have the right to leave Twitter, many people have, but you leave with everything that you've built over the years left behind. All of your followers, all of your relationships, all of your DMs, all of your content, that gets stored on server, and maybe you can download a version of it like in your archive, but that's dead data. You can't immediately plug that in and use that anywhere else. Like, those relationships aren't alive anymore. And in this network, when you move, everything stays alive. Like, your connections go with you, your data goes with you, and it's live data in the sense that you're still using it to talk to people. It shows up seamlessly in another app. Like, you log into even something like, Flashes, which is an Instagram alternative, and all the photos that I've posted on Bluesky show up in Flashes to instantly pre-populate my new photo sharing app. And so this means that a new app getting started is very easy. And when you move, it's like being able to have a passport and take all your belongings with you, which is how you want to move, not moving with nothing, which is essentially the state of modern social. You have to move as somebody going into exile with like nothing that came from your past and build a new life somewhere else. It's very difficult.
We need to talk about just how important this is, because then it's easy to build the photo sharing app, the video sharing app, the long form post app, the live streaming app, because you don't have to start over from scratch, building your connections, building your name, building your social graph. And I think that most people don't realize that these apps are compatible in this way.
Yeah, it's totally helps solve the zero start problem. It doesn't completely fix it because you still have to, customize what you inherit from the other social network for your content form. Like, when I logged into Flashes for the first time, all of the photos I'd ever posted to Bluesky showed up in a sort of Instagram layout, but not every photo that I posted to Bluesky was one that I wanted to, showcase.
Some were screenshots or random things that you would reply to someone.
But I could go through and edit that, right? And so the apps have to, make some design choices around, okay, well, how does the user bring everything, sort through it, and then like establish a home in this new space? Like, the good smart way to do it is to let the user go through and, or maybe intelligently filter, like, okay, screenshots we're going to throw away. We're going to like take a best guess and then let you go through and decide what data you'll keep and what you won't. And then maybe eventually I think having more audience segmentation will be a useful thing. So maybe all the people who follow me on Bluesky don't want to see my pictures, but they did want to hear what I had to say. Maybe that will be an audience segmentation. So some of my followers will come over and some of them won't. I think this is very capable of being achieved with something like an iOS permissioning system. When you download a new app, your Apple device says, do you want to give it access to your photos? Do you want to give it access to your contacts? And you can say yes or no, and then maybe even just choose some of the photos you want it to have access to open up the new app. I think social should work like that, where you can open up a new social app and it says, which relationships do you want to import? What photos do you want to import? How do you want to interact with this new app? Maybe you do want to start from scratch, but keep the same handle. Like, that should be possible too, And then it creates a world where you have this full flexibility to use these building blocks that come from every other social experience that you've built online, because as a user, that's very much your data. and then you can choose whether to keep it or to discard it.
I can see a world where we have this faceted identity too, where you have a single account and a login on single PDS, but you maybe have different usernames for different segments of stuff, or different, I have a bunch of different Bluesky accounts and I'm constantly switching between them. I could imagine a future where they're better connected, and, I'm okay with knowing that these are all different versions of me. One is the podcast, and one is for the Divine app, and one is for my personal app, and one is for my campaign against age verification in New Zealand. And that's the way we list in real life. I mean, the neat thing about Bluesky is, and all of these social protocols, ActivityPub and Nostr and these others too, is it's about building into the technology a reflection of how humanity works.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like we're very inspired by not just early web stuff, but just looking at how the real world works. Like, how does governance in the real world work? How does, moving from one city to the other work? You want to take your stuff with you and keep in touch with your friends, right? And so these are all sort of examples of what feels natural and human. And you want to bring that into your online life rather than having it be this sort of sterile shopping mall controlled by one corporation.
One thing that I think is really interesting is the way in which you've gone about developing this protocol and the technology. And I know it's a reaction to the very anarchic, dysfunctional way in which Scuttlebutt handled its own standards, which was not even documented, and who needs a process for it. To me, looking at it, it feels like one of the models in Eric S. Raymond's Cathedral and the Bazaar. These are two models for how open source technology could work. The Cathedral is, there's an architect and there's artisans and they design the thing and it is open. You can use the source code and you can, and the Bazaar is this sort of networked, messy, bottom-up way. And they're two totally legitimate ways of building it. And, to me, the Nostr protocol is very much the Bazaar. It's, there's no organization behind it. It's quite chaotic. And it's not as designed. And you've designed the app protocol with a lot of intention and a lot of vision on it. I wonder if you could talk about that juxtaposition in terms of design, and then talk about your new process of submitting the app protocol to the IETF so it becomes an open standard.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's all the way to a cathedral style design, because anyone can innovate on the app protocol lexicons, which is basically the schema space, right? And we control the Bluesky one, but people have been coming along and coming up with new ones to create new apps. And that's sort of like an archipelago style, building, where you have this one island where, everything kind of is consistent, but then you can go right next door and set up a new island and build a new sort of system, and the two can interact, but not necessarily be the same thing. We're letting governance of the broader, schema system emerge over time, and not really imposing a top-down hierarchy on how everything outside of the domain of what we control around Bluesky is going to do.
And then talk about the idea of making this a proper internet standard.
Yeah, so we recently took the parts of the app protocol to the IETF, not the whole thing, because that protocol is actually like a building block for a bunch of building blocks for building social apps. That's how someone described it once. I think it's a good metaphor. There's different blocks, like the identity system is one block, the repo structure is another. Each of these are kind of different pieces. And we started off with really just a tight focus on the repository structure. And maybe we just sort of standardize the data transfer part of this and the data protocol, and then bring the rest in later. And we got some feedback on maybe bringing more, but basically now we're moving into a working group at the IETF, which is the first stage of standardization. And it's going to be a long process, and we're going to have to hear a lot of feedback and get a lot of takes from the community and sort of pull in more builders as we go. And the ecosystem is growing and maturing as we do this. It's not so much standardizing a thing that's completely set in stone yet. It's like stuff is moving around. But over time, the goal is to arrive at a protocol that everyone feels good about making a long-term, publicly governed piece of internet infrastructure. And so that's arriving at something maybe as scoped and simple, but resilient as HTTP, which is what the whole web is built upon, or it could be something more complex. I'm not sure where we'll finally land with that, but if you want to talk more about it, it'd be great to have Daniel or somebody who's been leading that effort on the team on the podcast.
Yeah, I would love to talk that. I would love to talk about this sort of, how do you convert this open social platform and app and protocol into something that becomes fundamentally part of the internet and becomes something that is governed together. The IETF are the people who designed all of the core internet protocols, and they have this philosophy of, we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And it's how we built the internet. And I think it's how we want to continue to build the internet. It's not perfect, but it's an alternative to this idea that we just have a few large corporations that control things. And to me, that is the most inspiring thing that you've done with Blue Sky. You've shown that we can have something that is open, that is a protocol, that is open source, that has open moderation where you can choose who your moderators are, you open labeling, open user verification. New York Times verifies its own users. And then also make it easy. What is the dream? Where are you taking Blue Sky? And how can people who are using it understand and participate in it?
Social needs to be more open. Like, I just think the way that we have things set up right now with the centralized social networks is unsustainable. There's a lot of negative externalities for society, and users don't have much ability to change things. The only avenues to get change are to lobby the company or to lobby the government to regulate the company. And so that's where we are. We have a bunch of government regulations and a bunch of campaigns against these companies, but we don't have users directly building solutions because you can't. And so what we've tried to do is to put the tools in people's hands to build your own solutions. And I think that we're facing a very complicated world with a lot of challenges ahead of us as a society. And the best way to harness collective intelligence to solve these problems is to give people the ability to build solutions. And anyone, anywhere who has a good idea, whether that's a developer or somebody at a nonprofit or somebody just thinking about this problem a lot, can get involved and say, hey, I think I have an idea for a better social media feed that's going to reduce political polarization. Like, if you're a researcher working on that, you can just launch that feed as an experiment on Blue Sky and have people immediately start using it. It doesn't have to just live as an idea in a lab for years and you just message someone at Meta and hope that they pick it up, and they probably don't, So I think this is really critical for society to have this open experimentation and open innovation that happens, because otherwise there's no incentive for the big companies to innovate on what is really good for users and good for society, because what their bottom line is what's good for profits at that company. And so it's only users who can understand their own problems and build for their own solutions.
I'm not sure if you've seen what New Public has just released with their Roundabout product, but they looked at Nextdoor and they said this is a toxic cesspool. And then they looked at Front Porch Forum, which is a Vermont-based local social media app. And they said, well, then Front Porch Forum is really healthy. And then they said, well, how could we build that out in a larger world? And this is led by Blaine Cook and some other folks. And they, instead of just critiquing the platforms, which is what they have done before, very eloquently with lots of research reports, they're now moving over to our side where they're building it. And they have this thing called Roundabout, which is like Nextdoor, but like the good place version of Nextdoor. And so every time we see these things come about, it makes me happy, because now we have the ability, again, to build a better world for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, critique has its place, but directly taking action is a lot more powerful when you have the ability to do that. And so our goal is to build a whole social ecosystem where you have the ability to directly take action on whatever issue it is you're concerned about, whether that's moderation or the algorithm or even the whole way people engage with social. Maybe you think they should, turn off social media after 1 hour a day. Build a social app that does that and try to get people to use it.
And you don't have to build everything. You can build that one part of it. You can do that one experiment and continue to have everything else work on top of it. And that's so important, because otherwise we've been locking people out and we've been passive consumers of social media, which is ironic because it is supposed to be a participatory medium.
Yeah, I think social media should reflect society. And actually, society and this dominant form of communication have a reciprocal form of relationship. I actually think that the consequences on society itself of everyone using one centralized platform means that that society starts to centralize in its sort of structure and behavior. And so what you really want is if you want a pluralistic democratic society, you have to have a pluralistic democratic form of communication, which is, something that looks more distributed and controlled by more people than one company. And in that sort of environment, then you can really have different ideas flourish. Like, at the end of the day, I was not a decentralization purist. I was focused on what decentralization gives you, which is resilience and the ability to run many parallel experiments. So resilience and experimentation. And resilience means that if one node in the network or one company, turns evil or goes down, you still have other alternatives. And so the whole, network as a whole survives. And experimentation is just allowing, many different experiments to be tried at the same time, for the ecosystem to be very diverse and to evolve not just through one leader's vision or one company's plan, but through many people's experiments.
It's so amazing to hear that and everything else. And so ironic, given that all of the initial coverage of Blue Sky called it like Jack Dorsey's Blue Sky. And I was so frustrated because it didn't have you there. It didn't have Rose. It didn't have all of these people who have been working on this for a long time. And it implied that it was his thing. And he helped make sure that it got funding, and he supported in the early days and was briefly on the board, but it was never Jack Dorsey's Blue Sky. And it's never been Jay Graber's Blue Sky. It's always been the community's Blue Sky.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people really look to a leader to tell them, what this thing is about. And in social, we're very used to that because generally the social media CEO determines everything about that platform down to individual moderation decisions. But our goal has been to build an ecosystem where it's not all on one person, where there's more than one leader, and where new leaders can continuously arise. Like, Rudy, who you talked to, is a new leader who's building a whole parallel stack. And that's exactly what we wanted to see, which is people taking control to build what they want for their communities within this ecosystem and growing it not just through, building their community on Blue Sky, but building it in the broader atmosphere, interlinking with Blue Sky.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for your time. I realize we've gone a little over, and so much for all of your work. Everything you're doing has been an inspiration to me. It's an inspiration to the show that can do it. It inspires the work I'm trying to do with bringing back Vine with Divine. And I look forward to seeing everything else. If there's anything else you want to share with the audience.
Check out Blue Sky or check out Building on the App Protocol. I think vibe coding stuff is, vibe coding an app in a day is something that you can do now. I've seen some people to do it. So yeah, check it out. And I'll be sure to check out Divine. It seems pretty cool.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks again to Jay Graber for coming on Revolution.Social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for email newsletter, visit Revolution.Social.
For more interviews like this one, follow Revolution.Social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nostr's Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back in 2026. Happy New Year, and see you then.